Coming up on today's show, Jessie Dean is a master clinical hypnotherapist, certified mastery coach, creator of Hypnothera, the Emotion-Quotion Course, and the Bounce methodology. He is the founder of the Open Window Institute for Emotional Freedom, which is dedicated to educating people about the power of their unconscious mind to develop healthy emotional freedom. Jessie Dean can help you open the window to your unlimited potential to change unconscious behaviors, limiting thoughts and emotions that cause misery and are preventing you from driving your life in the direction that is stronger, wiser, and filled with absolute joy. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up, my conversation with Jessie Dean. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am super excited to be here with a dear friend and fellow entrepreneur and colleague of mine, Jessie Dean, who I've had the honor of getting to meet many times in person as we've traveled to seminars together, normally in California. And I've also had the honor and privilege of being on his podcast. So, Jessie, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life, your family life, and everything else that I know you've got going on to be here to have what I know is going to be a really beautiful conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Kitty. I really was looking forward to this since we talked on my podcast.
Excellent. Awesome. And I'd love to give you a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners in your own words.
Well, my name's Jessie Dean. I am a clinical hypnotherapist and emotional freedom coach with over 55 years of experience in business and life and challenges, failures and successes. Married 37 years to the same woman. I'm supposed to say that because somebody caught me up on that the other day. I thought that was great. She said to me, she's on her third marriage, my friend. She says, I think I've been married as long as you have, just to 3 different people.
That's funny. That's funny.
And she was my girlfriend in high school. So that was a great one.
Wow. That's fun.
So, and I'm here to share my emotional journey and talk about sexuality and polyamorous experience and my view of it from a clinician who's worked with all kinds of people with all kinds of perspectives on what it means to be happy and how to get there. So I'm just delighted to be here. Meeting you at the last in-person meeting we had in Huntington Beach at our cohort for online development. I really enjoyed. The most spectacular moment of the entire weekend was you dancing in a dinosaur costume.
Thank you. It sounds like that was transformational for many people, including me. So
I had no idea it was you because the dinosaur costume you wore was 12 feet tall, and I didn't know you were in it.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you enjoyed that. And it sounds like it made a lot of people's weekends, per se. And
that dinosaur was one hell of a dancer. I got to tell you that. When you're line dancing with a dinosaur, you know you've hit a new limit.
Oh, that was fun. I definitely need to bring that dinosaur costume out more often. I had no idea how much joy it would bring me and so many other people. And it was like a last minute decision. So I'm so glad I did that, Really cool. Well, I'd love to, I'm excited for the conversation too, Jessie, and it was just a delight to get to know you over the years and to talk to you more deeply when I was on your podcast. And it just seems so natural to have you come here for our listeners. And especially since our podcast here is all about healthy relationships and living your most authentic life as happy as possibly with the least amount of suffering as possible. And that definitely aligns with your work. So I'm curious, since you had been happily married for 37 years, congratulations on that. I'm sure we'll dive a little bit more into that. I'd love to start by asking, what is your relationship to the ethical non-monogamy movement?
Well, it's tangential at this point. I wasn't even thinking about it till you and I met, and I found out what you did.
Mhm.
And then I've had my past experiences as youth in my teens and 20s, where I had multiple relationships operating at the same time and dealing with my inability to compartmentalize that. I was surprised how easy some of the women I were involved with were able to do that. But I came to the conclusion eventually that it was just too complicated for me because the sexuality for me and intimacy was so intense. Um, I said, I can't handle this. So I decided it was just too much overload. And but I've experienced since then emotional polyamorous
Mhm.
relationships, and that we didn't actually talk about that together before, but I thought I might bring that up because um, being married for 37 years to the same partner, um, she does not meet all my needs. And I realized that many years ago that I have certain emotional needs, intellectual needs that I actually find met in other relationships. And some of them are women. And so that originally was very threatening to my wife, who is Japanese, comes from a very conservative culture and background. And she could not comprehend why I needed to be talking to these other women who had similar intellectual interests or artistic interests, and that we would be able to speak about our lives together, and it was a sense of joy and happiness. But eventually, I was able to demonstrate to her that there was no threat. So that did relieve her sense of jealousy and insecurity
Mm.
about that. But it took years for that.
Wow. And I'm totally curious. And that was transpiring before you and I met. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, long,
Mhm.
long before, and continues to this day. Um, it's and and I it's interesting. It blew up. Uh, and let's see, blew up in 2022 when I was going through my third round of radiation treatment. And I'd already been through 6 weeks of radiation treatments for cancer twice. And then it was time they discovered that they found a few more lesions in my body. My cancer had spread into my bones. And the doc said, look, the other two radiations were very successful. We recommend we do this one more time and check these new lesions. And when I realized I was going to do that, I was talking to some of my friends. Uh, and these people were absolutely no threat to my marriage. But my
Mhm.
wife freaked out because I was spending time with them or on the phone, and that was a wake up call. We had to we had to talk a lot about that, and it ended up me taking a year's sabbatical from the marriage and traveling across the country to heal in a reclusive mountain home in the upstate New York forests, which was what I needed to do to really integrate after all that healing, um, technological healing that just so disruptive to the body.
Wow. I didn't know that you did that. So when you say healing, are you more talking about the healing from the treatments or the healing from some of those conversations just to make sure with your wife?
Both,
Oh, both.
both.
Mhm.
So the radiation treatment is a devastating physical attack on the entire body, and you feel like you're dying. You're basically being roasted like a rotisserie chicken hanging in a Chinese butchery in Chinatown. And you keep going back. I remember the first time I arrived at one of these radiation centers, the tech, who had a wry sense of humor, said, you're gonna like me now, but you're gonna hate me in 6 weeks when this is over." And I said, "No,
Oh.
you're a really nice guy." He said, "No, no, you're gonna associate me with what's happening to you."
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I did not hate him, but I did not like the process, obviously.
Right. Right.
Um, so that third round in 18 months was really devastating. And my ability to modify or moderate my emotions was gone. I mean, I was just I was a 60 at that time. See, I'll be 70 in a week. So I was like 66 when in an 8-year-old body and brain. And I had no emotional control. I was just, if she said something, it was overwhelming to me. If I said something, it was overwhelming to her. and and it was like she packed her bags and she put them at the top of the step and she said, "I'm leaving." And I said, "Well, where are you going? Because I don't have any money to pay for you to go anywhere." I've been battling cancer here for 8 years, at that time, 6.5 years. And it's not like I've got a lot of surplus resources here. And so she left the bag at the top of the steps for 2 weeks. And then we had another kerfuffle when I was talking to my neighbor, who is also a woman, and I was doing some work on her home to just keep my mind engaged and not focusing on the fact that I'm going into radiation tomorrow and the day after. And
Wow.
and I said, "You know what? Well, I'm going to ask if I can go house sit a home that I know about up in the Berkshires and upstate New York. And if I can, you don't have to go anywhere. You can stay here and we can have a break and I can just concentrate on juicing and healing and sitting in the forest and writing and getting better." And turned out I got permission to do that, and I rented a great big SUV, loaded it up with all my music equipment, all my instruments, my writing, my computers, and I drove cross country, and I spent a year up there, went through the entire seasons from the fall back to the fall through a New England winter. I hadn't done that in 50 plus years. I had a blast. And I got back in touch with myself, and I started working again remotely. And that's where I started my online journey and realized I could do this work helping people online, and they didn't have to be in an office with me.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it was a significant life change, and I came back, and the marriage was much healthier.
Wow.
And we were
That is fascinating.
communicating sporadically through that time, but my real connections were with other women that we were talking about our life experience, because my wife she's not oriented in the way that I am to talk about emotions or the state of the relationships. Never been a conversational subject that she enjoyed or was interested in.
That is fascinating. And by the way, I just went to the Berkshires for the very first time, so it's interesting that you mentioned that between Christmas and New Year's this year.
Where were you?
Oh, I don't know exactly the name of the town, but we were a friend of my husband's had rented a Airbnb, and we did drive into some of the cute little towns. Great Barrington.
Yes, 10 miles from where my home is.
Oh wow!
Family home.
Okay.
Yes, I know Great Barrington well. So you know exactly where I was. You were there in the winter, so you should now make the trip back. I'm planning to go back there in the fall for a couple of weeks, and if that's the case, you got to come up with your husband and enjoy the change. It's spectacular.
That's so cool. Yeah, we were visiting. He bought a plot of land and he's planning to settle there, live there. He's in his late 50s himself, so hopefully we will be spending some more time up there, where we did some plant medicine, by the way.
What kind of plant medicine did you do?
Or I guess maybe it's not plant medicine. It was the chocolate bars that have I guess technically weed, I guess, that's in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is plant medicine.
I guess you're right.
Yeah.
So we did that while we were there, and I found it very transformative, and we were looking out the forest, and it was amazing.
Was there snow on the ground, or was it all gone?
It was all gone. Yeah, it was all gone at that time. But it was beautiful. So it's interesting.
I'm so excited that you got to experience that.
I did. Yeah. And it took me a second to remember Great Barrington, but I'm glad I did while we were talking. Because that was a fun thing that I didn't know we had in common.
I shop over there when I'm up there. There's some wonderful groceries over in Great. It's 10 miles away, and it's a wonderful drive.
Yeah, that's neat. So that's a fascinating thing. So with your 37-year-long marriage, and you taking that year-long sabbatical, which I find incredible, all the way across the country, what would you say are some of the things that you either transformed within yourself or that you think helped impact in a positive way your marriage to be healthier when you came back? And how did you both survive that year break? Tell me just a little bit more about that. I'm fascinated about that.
Well, part of the reason to be there was I had been sick, very mortally sick for 6.5 years at that
Hmm.
point. And simultaneously, and I think the radiation treatments and the chemo treatments probably triggered this. It really broke down my sense of egoic self and expanded my sense of cosmic self, because it did. I could probably go into the physics of that, but it did have that effect. And as my boundaries were dissolving, my sense of oneness was expanding, and so it was really hard to be the source of pain for my wife when I'm trying to be who I am, and it's making her really uncomfortable. I couldn't control her emotions, and that's why I said, "Look, we need to take a break, and I'm going to go there and be safe, and you're going to be here with your routine, and you'll be safe, and we'll communicate as we need. But I really need to take care of myself, um, without anybody trying to take care of me." And my wife is a very adoring partner who is sure she knows how to take better care of me than I do. So I couldn't battle that anymore. I didn't have any boundaries, which is interesting since that's
Mm.
part of the name of your universe.
Yeah.
And so while I was there, I was meditating a lot. I was chanting a lot. I've been practicing Buddhism for 40 years. I met my wife 2 years after I started practicing Buddhism in the same Buddhist lay organization. And that was the common bond that brought us together, that we used our Buddhist practice to stay centered and to serve others. And so neither one of us were giving up our practice. We're just creating a space so that we would she wouldn't be trying to fix me and I would be trying to fix her. And
Oh,
so that
yeah.
year alone, I spent a lot of time reflecting on me and what my core sense of self and values are. And I ended up letting go of a great deal of identities and just letting the universe be what it is, letting go and letting people just be who they are without the
Mhm.
need to have them change their behavior or even their thoughts and communication. It's okay, this is who this person is. And that was liberating and revelatory. And so when I came back, I wasn't sensitive and protecting myself. I didn't feel I had anybody or anything to protect. And we settled back in, and life continued as before. And here, we're still here, and delighted to have welcomed a 1-year-old grandson, which we visited this past week. So it made me reflect on all the different dynamics in our relationship of what I valued and what had disturbed me. And I decided that all the things that disturbed me was something inside of me that I could let go.
Wow.
The thing that bothered me most is her trying to change me. And I
Mm.
realized she's trying to do that. I must be trying to do that back. And so in the spirit of Itai, the concept of your environment reflects what's going on internally, I said, okay, this is only going to change if I stop wanting her to be different than she is. And the more I did that, the less and less she had the impulse to correct me or tell me to be a different way. And it really transformed the relationship.
That's fascinating.
It is. I mean, think about all the breakdowns in relationships that people have. It's usually you're not doing it the way I want,
Mhm.
right?
Well, yeah, and one question I have too is I'm sure going through that could have maybe broken some connections and some marriages. So I'm curious, was there ever a moment or multiple moments where either you or your wife worried, like, what if this is it? What if we end up getting divorced? Like, we're not going to get to the other side of this? Or was there really an underlying faith that that some one way or another you were going to get through this or something in between?
No, I think actually from the start, the possibility of the marriage being over was center stage,
Mm.
and much more so in her mind than in mine. And I mean, she was ready to move on when she packed her bags.
I see.
And I said, well, we're both under a lot of stress. This is a difficult time. And I don't know if we should be making a decision about our marriage based on the stress we're going through right now. And I think, taking that break is probably the healthiest thing we could do. And she agreed. And it wasn't like she was looking around for another partner while I was away. She was enjoying her studies and her development and her growth and her friends. And so throughout the year, I wasn't saying, well, is my marriage over or not? It was, again, concentrating on my own, loving myself and being true and honest to myself, and developing boundaries that were healthy for me.
Wow. There's you probably haven't heard this book, but there's a book called Polywise that, of course, is talking about consensual non-monogamy and polyamory. And one concept they have in there is called creating a temporary vessel, meaning when maybe you're going through a transition, and it almost sounds a little bit like that's what you and your wife did, is that you took this temporary vessel of 365 days, having that sabbatical and creating some more of a sense of safety, like we're not going to make a decision during this time period, and then we're going to come back in and check in with each other. Does that resonate with you?
That was definitely something that we didn't discuss. Like, okay, we got a deadline, we're going to make a decision. But it was discussed before I left that we're going to see where we're at throughout the year. I came back several times for treatments for a few days. And each time I got to check in and calibrate, where are we at relationship-wise and emotionally, where am I at in this relationship? So that was interesting. I think I came back 4 times throughout the period for several days each.
Okay. So you're kind of like doing little check-ins. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. So, and I know that you shared with me that you've practiced Buddhism for over 45 years, which is amazing. Tell me a little bit more about how that keeps you balanced, or how you incorporate that.
Well, I'll
into
tell
your
you
life.
this will probably fascinate you and your audience. The reason I started to practice Buddhism was for sex. And so I'll tell you this short story, and this will give you some sense of what had happened. I got my degree in music, and I was in the orchestra at San Francisco State playing saxophone. And the buddy next to me, Jimmy, he was also a saxophonist, and he turns to me one day in rehearsal and he says, "Hey, Jess, would you like to come to a Buddhist meeting?" And I turned to him and I said, "Buddhist schmoodish, Jimmy, you're as Jewish as I am. What are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, you want to come learn how to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo?" And I said, "Nam Myoho what?" And he said, "Nam Myoho Renge Kyo." I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, that's the sound of the rhythm of the universe." And I said, what are you talking about?" He says, Tina Turner, she chants Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and Howard Bland and Herbie Hancock and Buster Williams and Wayne Shorter, all these musical heroes of mine. I said, "Well, what's it doing for them?" He says, "Well, they it's the sound of the universe. If you chant it, you get in rhythm with the sound of the universe," which all sounded kind of wooey to me. But we were really good plant medicine partners. We smoked a lot of weed together back in those days. And I said, "Well, what's it doing for you, Jimmy?" He says, "Well, I'm getting laid." And I said, "What?" He said, "I'm getting laid." I said, How's that work?" He says, "Well, actually, my girlfriend, Elizabeth Eichenhold, she's the one who introduced me to the chanting." And I said, "Elizabeth, she's a Buddhist?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "That's interesting." I said, "Well, how does this work?" He says, "Well, we're having a good sex life, but when we're hanging around too much, sometimes it gets a little frictious, and we start picking each other, and she'll sit down in front of her Buddhist altar that has a scroll inside with it's written right down on the scroll, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And by the way, in the language none of us can read, and she starts chanting and she calms down. And then I sit down next to her And I start chanting with her, and I calm down. And the next thing you know, we're back under the sheets. I said, "When's the next meeting, Jim?" I'm a 25-year-old horny young man. And he said, "Tonight." So that's how I ended up going to my first Buddhist meeting in what was that? 1975 or it? Yeah. 1980. I think it was 1980. That was an amazing experience.
That
But I
is
didn't start
fascinating.
practicing till 5 years later.
Okay.
But
And so
at that time, one of the reasons I started chanting was to get back together with a broken-hearted fiance that had dropped me after we had decided we were going to get married. And I chanted to get back together, and we did. So I kept chanting. It's been 40 years.
So you chanted and you got back together with that previous fiance who's not your wife.
We got back together again, and we were together for about 9 months, and then she flipped out and she started getting violent. Like if I didn't say do what you want to do, she would hit me. I've never been hit by a woman before. And I said, "This is not healthy." And I withdrew from I chanted to get out of the relationship. And I did. So, it was very helpful. Many people may remember Tina Turner talks about chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to get out of her violent relationship with Ike Turner. And that worked for her. Because when we chant, we develop a stronger sense of self-value. And it was, it has been true for me all these years. So,
wow. So now I'm curious about this. This is all so fascinating, Jesse. You are just a cornucopia of awesome and interesting things, including your music, your chanting, all of that. So what would you say is some of your, what do you think is the minimum way if people are like, wow, I want chanting to help me with my relationships or to help me with my sex life? Is there like a minimum or a best practices?
There's a great quote from the man who founded this particular form of Buddhism, a man named Nichiren Daishonin, who wrote hundreds of letters to his students, his disciples, in 13th century Japan, many of them women, and many of the most profound treatises he sent to women, because it's very unusual for women to be even interested in pursuing enlightenment and Buddhism at that time. But one of the ones he wrote to a samurai who was also a doctor, a man named Shijo Kengo, and he says that Shijo Kengo was going through some real difficulties where he's being persecuted politically by his former friends in the samurai class. And Nichiren wrote him a letter that said, "Just stay at home with your wife and drink sake and chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. You'll be fine."
That's hilarious.
So I never forgot that. Oh, that sounds like a good way to spend time with my wife, with your woman, your partner, whoever that is. So if anybody wants to learn about that, they can go to sgi.usa.org or buddhability.org and learn all about how to chant in your own life and take it at your own pace and start getting the benefit. I had an extraordinary experience last week that is pertinent to this. While I was in San Francisco, I was invited to dinner with the first woman I ever asked to marry me while I was in college. And she turned me down. She wasn't ready. She was 4 years younger than I was, and she just wasn't ready to make that kind of commitment. And I found her on Facebook after I found a picture of her in one of my albums, and I said, "I wonder what happened to her." And we ended up Facebook, messaging together. And then she invited me up to her home in Berkeley to have dinner with she and her husband of 27 years. So we get up there, and I got there at 4:00. We're at the top of the mountain looking out on the San Francisco Bay and the sunset. The San Francisco's in the distance. Their home is just marvelous, fantastic gardens of fruit, and it's just a great spot. And he tells me at dinner that he goes out in the morning and he chants to this redwood tree out in front of the house because he believes in nature. He's like a nature lover. This guy's 84 years old. He's like 27 years older than my former girlfriend.
I was just doing the math there. Yeah.
Right. And they'd been married 27 years. They'd lived together, I think 3-4 years before that. But I said, "Well, what are you chanting?" And he says, "Well, I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I said, well, how do you do that? And he says, I go, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And he says, am I doing it right? I said, as long as you're chanting, it's right. But let me explain to you how the practice is supposed to be done. And I explained that to him and translated the Lotus Sutra for him. And we had a great time. And that was completely unplanned. That here he says, you've been doing this for 40 years? Yeah. I said, how long you been doing it? He says, for 15. I said, who told you about this? He said, a violinist I met up in Santa Rosa. He's a bass player. I said, what was her name? And I knew this woman, that she had met him on a gig and told him to chant, suggested it. And 15 years ago, he started integrating that into his daily spiritual ritual and practice.
Wow.
Wasn't that was just amazing?
That's like the universe just kind of serving it up for you,
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And what's also so interesting is as I witnessed the dynamics of this couple, one of the reasons that my relationship with this woman did not proceed was she was very yang, and I was very yang at the time, back in the day when we were in college. This man was very, very yin, and their marriage is based on this amazing harmonious resonance between the two of them. And that was fascinating. I didn't say anything to him about it. I just celebrated it.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome. I'm so glad that you got to have that experience and have with some, like, not just closure, but just, creating those connections across time and space.
Over 50 years. And it's not closure. It's like, please come back anytime.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That is so cool.
Sat down at their piano and started playing, and he says, I like this guy.
Uh-huh. And I'm curious, where was your wife and all that? Like, was she at a place where she was more
taking
peaceful
care of our
about them?
grandson? She had the whole day with our grandson, taken care of by herself, and she would not trade that for meeting. She was invited, but she said, no. I'm going to hang out with our grandson.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else to get in the way between us.
That's really cool. But it doesn't sound like she was threatened at all.
No, she wasn't.
That's really cool. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about, like, what your daily practice is in this context and what some of the benefits are that you derive from that.
Very simple. In this form of Buddhism, which is called SGI Nichiren Buddhism, we recite 2 excerpts of the Lotus Sutra, which declare that human beings are eternal and that their greatest joy is to act with compassion. That's the message inside these 2 excerpts from the Lotus Sutra. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is the title of the Lotus Sutra, and it's the mantra that a practitioner chants to their heart's content. So there's no prescription how long you should chant.
Oh, I see.
You might chant 5 minutes. Some days I'll recite the 2 excerpts, which takes 3 to 5 minutes to do, which are preparation for just clearing your mind and then chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and focusing on the good that you desire. The genius of Nichiren was that he inscribed a mandala, a written document, with Nam Myoho Renge Kyo written down the center, to remind all living beings that they have this potential inside of them. And that potential is life itself. So we're celebrating our life itself in its highest expression of courage, compassion, and action.
Wow, that is inspirational.
Each person, when they chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, they feel more grounded in themselves. They feel their connection to life itself, and you can direct that energy by chanting for other people and sending them your goodwill through that chanting. It's done with the eyes open, typically. I mean, he said, chant, look at the Gohonzon, but never seek this Gohonzon, go meaning honorific, Honzon, object of respect. Never seek this outside of your life. It only exists within your life. And later teachers said, what he's meaning is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is your life itself. And you think about all the quantum physics that's going on in the consciousness studies, and people are coming to the conclusion that the universe is alive, that it's life itself. Mm-hmm. And it just, wherever there's an environment, there's life. Nichiren wrote that many, 700 years ago, which is the difference between wherever life is, there's an environment. we are creating our environments because we're the conscious life in the environment. That is a
Mm,
revolutionary concept for human beings.
that is. That is because it's also it's empowering because we realize that we are the creators. So even if things are happening around us that aren't what we actually desire, I think it's humbling to realize, wait, how am I attracting this? How am I creating this thing that I don't want, right?
That's right, and that's a big question that a lot of human beings come to ask. Typically, it's like, why do bad things happen to good people? Or, if there's a God, why does God allow this terrible circumstance
Mm.
to be happening to human beings? And in Buddhism, the concept of a monotheistic deity doesn't exist. The whole philosophy is about you are a human being, which is a living being with the ability to develop your consciousness. And you are born with a package of causes you made in previous existences because Buddhism
Oh.
has the concept of life is eternal, so that you keep reincarnating based on the unresolved causes you made in the past, to the point where you have nothing you have to resolve in terms of creating a harmonious frequency in the universe. And at that point, then the question is, what are you going to do when you have total choice on how you are going to express your energy in the universe? Are you going to go hang out in a spiritual country club? Or are you going to have the compassion to return, take on a human life that is filled with suffering and transform that in order to demonstrate and show others that they don't have to suffer either? And that's what the Lotus Sutra teaches. He says, Buddhism is not about hanging out in a cave someplace. It's about living life to the fullest, because he says, life and death are nirvana. This cycle that we go through is the whole purpose of being here, to enjoy it.
Dude, I think you know this. I'm about to go on a retreat with some beautiful people that you and I know, David Thunder, Lisa
Oh, wonderful.
Tosti, and the Azores in Portugal. And I know we're going to be meditating. And you got my wheels spinning because I'd love to see if I can release this episode so that people can benefit to listening to it all over the world. But the attendees for this retreat, because I'd love just you're saying this so succinctly and so beautifully that really I think is easy to understand and can really lovingly pierce people's heart and consciousness to hear what you're saying, because I
Well,
think this is
that's
really
that's
beautiful.
beautiful. I hope that happens. The,
Mm,
the the one of the beautiful things about this Buddhism is that it is propounded and spread throughout the world by the SGI, the Soka Gakkai International, and it is the most diverse religious organization on the planet. Gay, straight, LGBT, transgender, um, non-binary. There's a place for anybody in this religious community because we are celebrating you. We're not like
mm.
celebrating the Buddha out there. It's like, hey, if you're finding yourself struggling in your environment because the environment's consciousness isn't high enough to recognize your dignity, if you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, your life's going to get strong enough where you will transform that environment. And I've seen that happen thousands and thousands of times over the last 40 years.
That is amazing. Thousands and thousands of times over the last 4
Yes.
years. That is amazing. So inspirational. And I'm sure to some folks that are listening, they might be thinking, oh, this is kind of woo woo or whatever. But I love that you just gave that example. Like you've seen evidence in your decades on the planet of how this type of practice can really just make complete transformation. That's awesome.
I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times in my life,
Mhm.
and it has sustained me through, as you know, in the last couple of years, 4
Yeah.
surgeries, about to
Yeah.
have a 5th, and financial challenges. I've been able to overcome those. Relationship dynamics, I've been able to transform those. Um,
Is there
and
any, like, one example or 2 that kinda stand out that you think might have, like, a wow factor for anybody listening?
oh my goodness. Well, I think one a major wow. I'm going to tell you a mystical experience that is based in reality, that was so personal, it was life transforming. And it was transformative because when I did start to chant, it wasn't until 5 years after I'd been to that first meeting. The chanting seemed so alien and foreign from, I was in paradigm shock when I went to that discussion meeting where the people were chanting. But what the only thing that I got from the meeting that was really positive was that the room was filled with all kinds of human beings. This is San Francisco, Noe Valley in 1980, and it is a room full of every kind of human being you can imagine: Asian, Indian, Black, white, Hispanic, corporate, punk, Gothic, dreads. I mean, there were 50
Yeah.
people in this living room, and it was just a rainbow of humanity. And that stuck in my mind, that all of these people were advocating that chanting this Nam-myoho Renge Kyo was having a positive impact on their life. So I didn't chant because it scared the hell out of me. These people were chanting so fast it sounded like bebop Buddhism. I mean, whoa! They were all together, but it was like in total unison. And so 5 years later, I backed into a wall in a racquetball court. And on April 15th, 1985, nearly broke my neck and back. I was knocked unconscious, disabled, and I was in a lot of pain. This is the beginning of my back issues that were severe. And 6 months later, I was out of my mind with pain because I wouldn't take any pain medicine. At the time, I had been doing yoga for 4.5 years, and I just wouldn't take anything that was going to pollute my brain. I was on a Kundalini journey of enlightenment. And I had this Kundalini experience 6 months earlier, and I was out of balance with my body. So I ended up landing in the wall when I didn't plan on it. So 6 months later, I was bipolar, and the bipolar was manic swings from ecstasy and euphoria to absolute terror and hell and agony. And there was no predictability to the cycle. It would just flash back and forth whenever it wanted to. And I was suicidal in December. I got up and said, there's no reason for me to be alive. I felt so ashamed that I had messed up my life. I couldn't work. I was in pain. I was out of money. I'm renting a house with not paying the rent. I'm 4 months behind in the rent. I can't stand up. And there's go in the kitchen with the true desire to take my life. I take out a butcher knife. I put it up to my chest. I have a letter opener here. I had the thing up to my chest like this, and I looked down and I said, what am I doing? And I threw it down, and I picked up the phone, called my dad, who's a doctor, was a doctor, he's passed, and I told him what had happened. He said, okay, great you called. They'd been monitoring me for 6 months because they knew I'd been hurt and they'd seen me. And he said, I'm going to call and see if I can't get you some help. It was a Sunday morning, the second Sunday morning of December 1985. And I waited, and he calls back and said, look, everybody's out of town. They're all at a psychiatric conference in New Orleans. It's the end of the year. He'll be back. He'll see you Wednesday at 4:00. Don't leave the house. And call me if you feel like you're going to hurt yourself. I said, okay. The next thing that happens is there's a knock on the door 10 minutes later, and there are two Jehovah's Witness African-American women out there on a Sunday morning with their watchtower inviting me to talk about Jesus. And I said, I really appreciate you ladies, but this is not a good time. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Close the door. 10 minutes later, there's another knock on the door. And I'm thinking, okay, they travel in herds. There's going to be some more ladies with the Watchtower magazine. And I open the door, and there's my friend Jimmy from college, who I hadn't seen in 3 years because he had chanted to take a band to Europe, which he did. And he was gone for 3 years in Germany. And he's standing on the doorstep with a beautiful young woman. And he said, I've been back 6 months. I just found out where you lived. I came out to see if you're here and how you're doing. And I tried to explain what the condition I was in, because I was like really slowed down. And he comes in and he says, well, hey, I know what to solve this problem. Let's chant. And I said, chant what? And he said, remember that meeting I took you to 5 years ago? Let's chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And his girlfriend, Jocelyn at the time, sits down. The three of us are sitting on the couch in this tiny little house out in the sunset, chanting to the wall.
Yeah.
Yo ho renge kyo. Nam yo ho renge kyo. And my mind went like it had just come back together, having been exploded for 6 months. And I said, what the hell is this? He says, it's the rhythm of life. And I said, how does it work? He says, I don't know. That's why they call it the mystic law. Nam myoho renge kyo. Devotion to the Nam is devotion. Myo means mystic. Ho means law. And renge means cause and effect. The lotus flower signifies cause and effect. Growing in a swamp. And out of our suffering, we pursue enlightenment. That was the mystery of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And 10, 15 minutes later, my mind starts to fragment again. And he says, well, let's chant some more. So we chanted for 10 minutes. And this time my mind stayed together for 20. And I said, this first time I felt normal in 6 months. And like I felt like myself, I said, this is incredible. I says, how does it work? He says, I don't really know because I'm not a big student, but I can introduce some people that'll tell you because anybody can study. I'm just not into study. So he, the next day, came and picked me up. He dropped me off at somebody's house, and I chanted with that person for 2 hours. He picked me up after that, took me to somebody else that dropped me off there. I chanted with them for a couple hours, and he did that on Tuesday. Wednesday morning, he picks me up, takes me, and we chant. And at 4 o'clock, I show up at the doctor's office at San Francisco Hospital, the USF, to meet with the psychiatrist, the head of the Department of Psychiatry. And he says, what's up? And I talked to your dad. I told him what happened. He says, look, you don't appear to have anything wrong with you. I can't prescribe any medicine without there being some symptoms. What's changed between Sunday morning when you almost took your life and Wednesday afternoon? I said, well, have you ever heard of this? Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I show him this card. And he said, no, I haven't heard about that. I said, do you know anything about chanting? He says, oh, yeah, people chant in Asia. That's part of people's life. He said, if that's working for you, why don't you just keep doing that? And if it doesn't, you call me. I'll be your backstop. And I never saw him again.
Jesse, that is the most incredible story. Wow. I'm so glad I asked that.
I'm glad you asked, Sue.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is amazing. So I don't even know what to say about that, except I think I'm probably going to start chanting like later today.
Yeah. Renge Kyo, yes.
Wow.
Buddhability.org. You can learn all about it there for free.
Yeah, I am just blown away by that. So thank you for telling that story. I can't wait to release this podcast episode.
And so after I started to get my health back, one of the reasons I was so depressed was that my fiance had broken up with me the previous December, a year earlier. And I was heartsick, which was so the first thing they said, you can chant about anything in your life that you want to improve. And I said, I want to get back together with my former fiance. I was just addicted to sex with this woman. And it was like, oh my God. And so I found out that she had another boyfriend. And I said, well, they said anything. So I started chanting about that. And I chant about it every day, morning and evening. And 3 months later, we got back, she dropped that guy and we got back together again. We hadn't talked for 10 months, almost a year we hadn't spoken. But we ended up in the same place at the same time. And the next thing you knew, we started dating again. And then 3 months later, she hit me again. And I thought, no, I'm not going down this path. It's not worth it. So I chanted to get out. She didn't want to end the relationship. But
oh my God. You are just seriously, you're a cornucopia of amazing stories that are just over the top awesome. And also to speak to possibility, and like you said, the mystic nature and also how empowered we can be as human beings to positively affect our lives, to get out of, physical ailments, help with the relationships. Just wow, Jesse, really inspiring.
Delighted to talk to you, Kitty.
Yeah, no, you're amazing.
I was chanting 2 years later, 1987. I was chanting to the Gohonzon, the scroll, and I chanted, you know what? I want a partner in life that understands what this Buddhism is about. and is dedicated to teaching other people about it. And so I chanted about that. In the frame of, I'm looking for a Kozen partner, somebody to do my human revolution as I transform all this karma inside of me and create a life of happiness together. And I met my wife, my present wife, 3 months later. She was practicing this Buddhism, and we ended up being transferred into the same district to support some local members in the Mission District of San Francisco. And then that was in December. I stepped out on the sidewalk one night in February, and she was, the only thing I didn't like about my wife at the time is she smoked after these meetings. I couldn't believe it. And here I am, this guy had been doing clean yoga for 5 years, and this beautiful Japanese gal with 2 kids, small kids, divorced, and she having a cigarette. And I hear her say to her girlfriend that she's having a cigarette with, that her boyfriend wanted to marry her and retire and move to Hawaii. And she said she wasn't going to do that because he wasn't committed to chanting. He wasn't really into it. But this was what her life was all about, to help people. So I walked across the sidewalk and I said, "Excuse me, I know you don't really know me, but if there's any doubt about marrying that fellow, would you consider marrying me?" And she laughed. They laughed. And, "You don't even know me." I said, "Well, I've seen you around here, since December. And, I know a good value when I see it." She says, "I'm 5 years older than you. I've got 2 kids." I said, "No problem. I can handle that." Well, we got married in June.
Wow.
So what was
June,
that?
June what?
June of 1988. That was February 1988. So
Oh, okay.
June, July, August. What is it? February, March,
Uh-huh.
April, May, June.
When
5 months
I
later.
love numbers. So what was the date? June what?
Oh, June 25.
I would 25. I was just curious. That's cool.
That's the Jack of Clubs. It's a charismatic learning vibration, and that's what it's been.
That's interesting. So, and I love numbers too. And I know you know Dr. Joe Dispenza, right?
Yes.
One of the seminars that my husband and I like to watch, he cracks a joke about how people will come up to him and say, "Dr. Joe, I've been meditating for 3 days and nothing happened." And I love that you mentioned 3 months multiple times. Like you chanted for 3 months and something happened, and you chanted for 3 months and then something happened. So I think that's also just an interesting thing to be noting, that number just kept coming up as you were talking. And
well, that's interesting. You should say that, because when people ask, "How long is this going to take to work?" I tell them, it depends on your karma, on your life, how much resistance and how out of touch you are with your true self.
Oh, wow.
And what really makes you happy. But most people say, try it for 90 days. If it doesn't work, if you try it for 90 days, if you learn to recite the sutra, which is doing what they call gongyo, the assiduous daily practice, morning and evening, and chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and it doesn't work, I'll quit.
Wow. That is incredible. Well, I've loved every moment of talking to you, Jesse, and maybe we'll end up doing another episode at some point. But I want to honor your time and make sure, is there anything before we start to tie this up that you would like to share with our listeners, whether it's something you want to leave them with, a piece of wisdom, or maybe a question that I didn't ask you? Anything come to mind?
Yes. I would say, who's ever listening, wherever you are, a piece of wisdom. All learning, behavior, and change is taking place at the unconscious level of your mind. And the more you learn about the operation of your unconscious mind, the more effective you're going to be in transforming your life. This particular form of Buddhism that we're talking about, Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, has a map ready-made for you to reflect and see what's going on inside your mind. It's called the object for observing your mind. So it will expand your understanding of the workings of the universe. And it's a great, great practice to integrate into your spiritual life, if you choose to do something like that. The other piece about this is all the suffering that I've witnessed in my own life and others' lives is the result of being attached to something being other than the way I would like it to be. And I'm going to turn 70 next week on April 1st. And I would say to everyone, the more you let go of the attachment, which is at a core philosophy inside of Buddhism, it's not letting go of the enjoyment. It's letting go of the attachment to the enjoyment. Enjoy what there is to enjoy and suffer what there is to suffer, because that's what life is about. And enjoy your life and help those that are suffering alongside you enjoy theirs. That's the journey we're on. It's, the universe created sexuality to be fun and pleasurable, because without it, there wouldn't be anybody to enjoy anything.
That's true. Well said, Jesse.
Right?
Well said.
So it's part of the enjoyment part of the puzzle. If we can get rid of all the taboos and the crazy negative sexual messages that people have been taught for thousands of years, it's just, this is a great time to be alive, even though there's a lot of chaos going on. And it's even better if each one of us becomes happy and strong and shares that joy and strength with others.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful. What an incredible message. So for anyone listening, how can our folks learn more about you and open their windows to a new view, to discovery and living their most authentic lives?
They can go to my websites, owpro.com or openwindowinstitute.com. They can also enjoy my music at thejessedean.com. That's TheJessesse.DEAN.com. So thejessedean.com. And they can find me on Facebook at Jesse Dean or Open Window. And I look forward to meeting and getting to know anybody that reaches out.
That is so awesome. Well, Jesse, just thank you so much for a beautiful conversation, for your heart, for your soul, for you just expressing yourself so beautifully and eloquently, and also the just inspiring and incredible stories that you shared with us here today.
Oh, thank you, Kitty, for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships, while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.